This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Today, and I'm being very careful to say today in a democratic sense, we laugh around about democracy and timing. The message today, the discussion today, is democratic in the sense that it passes through all times and all seasons. And what we're talking about today is shelter. In fact, we're calling it the duty of shelter. And we should start off by saying that this is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am the voice of Respectonomics, joined by my co-host, Sarah Benton. I suppose we can, in a friendly way, we can say good morning to each other, can't we?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah. But the the discussion point is we went into this, realized that it is incredibly pervasive. It goes through all phases of our lives, frankly, 365. So what we want to talk about is shelter. And we're going to divide the discussion into two parts. The first part deals with personal shelter. The second one deals with corporate business shelter. I could probably add political shelter or governmental shelter in there as well. Dealing first of all, though, at the personal level, do you remember in the last few podcasts, we've been talking about the elements of human existence. So yes. We've talked about light and food and water and so. No, we haven't done water yet, but we've done oxygen and we've done people. This one is called shelter, and it is one of our human necessities for our existence. And when we look at shelter, in today's world, it's become a very topical subject because, frankly, one immediately goes to the issue of homelessness. I prefer to call it houselessness because you can have a house that is not a home. So I think we want to be looking at shelter, housing for everybody is a clarion call today. And I think we're all very aware of that. And it doesn't seem to matter whether you're in North America or Europe, but particularly in the rich world, there is way too much of this sense of houselessness, which, by the way, coincides with hopelessness. So when we look at shelter, the reason we shelter things, the reason we think it's important is one of the primary reasons is an act of preservation. So, for example, if you've got a beautiful piece of art, might be a picture, it might be silver, something that you particularly treasure. But I want to emphasize the word treasure. But one of the reasons you want to shelter it is because you want to preserve it. Does that seem reasonable?
Fair, yes.
And I think that applies to the human being, that we are a treasure that we need to be sure that is properly protected and indeed sheltered. So how we actually achieve sheltering as human beings, part of it, of course, is to me, the most obvious one, of course, is being able to go undercover. So it's pouring rain or it's snowing or it's far too hot. I can get away from it. I can be sheltered.
Protected from the elements.
Protected from the elements, exactly. And that's the very physicality of it. But why this is interesting is two things. One is when we put something in shelter, I'll give you an example. My son-in-law is an agricultural, what would you call him, icon. I mean, lots of land and has been in the farm equipment business. And I said to him a day or two ago, do I need to put a piece of equipment away for the winter? To which he replied, well, if you don't, its value will go down by 50%. Meaning, in other words, it needs to be properly protected.
Right.
And I think if we look at the human being, we are extremely valuable. And I think part of that shelter process is to preserve us, therefore to retain our value. So it's not just a physicality that we're talking about, which leads me to the second point, which is that we think very quickly about shelter very physically. But I think, Sarah, we can talk about shelter for the mind and shelter for the soul, the spirit, the inner being, the character of oneself. And if we're going to do that, I think there are a few things we need to address. And one of them is, how do I, as an individual, as a human being, how do I shelter my mind?
Mm.
And I think one of the keys to the sheltering your mind is to understand the incredible complexity of the human being and the remarkable people that we are. I'll give you an example. Do you ever do any carpentry? Do you do any woodwork?
Yes.
Yeah, you do, don't you? Yeah. Didn't you put up a fence a few months ago?
Well, I didn't put up the fence.
You didn't.
However, throughout my years
Yeah.
being around my dad, for sure.
Okay,
And
well, this is really making the point then, because if you've got a piece of, let's say, furniture or something that you've been cobbling together and, dovetailing and all the fancy things you do to it, when you do it, have you noticed that you can get your finger and draw it across the surface and you can feel every imperfection? I don't know if you've done that. I'm sure you
Mhm,
have. And the sensitivity of your finger is unbelievable. That
mhm,
you can actually, I mean, I think there's an index that explains this better than I am, but it's actually will detect microns of abrasion or whatever you want to call it. But you can feel when there's something just not smooth, the corner,
right.
the surface, whatever. So you'd say, well, yeah, I've done that. Have you done that with
Yes, I have.
drawn your finger across the piece of furniture? That same hand that has that finger can, a matter of nanoseconds, be the same hand that is picking up a pickaxe or a sledgehammer and driving a 6-inch spiral nail into a block of wood. I mean, the human being, the dexterity, the spontaneity, the reflexes, and so on. There's no other sentient being that can get close to it. And when people talk about AI, give me a break. You will never find that finger that can feel the micron compared with the sledgehammer. You ain't going to ever see that. The human being is unbelievable. So when we talk about the shelter, we're talking about the value of the human being that needs to be sheltered, but we're also talking about understanding our incredible complexities and the values within those complexities that need to be sheltered. And we've talked
Mm,
about sheltering the mind. Sheltering the mind, how do you keep out the toxins and the contaminants? And candidly, I think most people know what those things are. It's
right.
when you're around people who are destructive or disruptive or negative or those kinds of things, people who are toxic, people who are angry. I think there's a way we can shelter ourselves from those kinds of situations. And I think we're all personally very aware of it. I think the purpose of this discussion isn't really to give the proverbial answer as much as to bring out an awareness of the necessity of sheltering the human being, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, or whether it's spiritual. But
Mhm,
whatever level you're looking at, it's incredibly personal. I think it's individual by definition. And I think most of us have an idea of what it is to be sheltered. And we do it to be for purposes of comfort. We do it for purposes of retaining our dignity. I think one of the worst things we can do is find ourselves being assaulted by unkind words and this kind of thing, and they all cut away at our dignity.
mhm,
But this business of shelter is a far more reaching, far more, and I say democratic. I reckon this cuts through. When I think of the other elements, we talked about oxygen and we've talked about light and so on. But I think the business of shelter is something we all need to spend a bit of time on and actually ask ourselves, am I being sheltered? It's just a
mhm,
question. Am I being sheltered, in my mind? Am I being sheltered in my body? And what steps can I take physically to give myself better shelter? So I think that's the personal side of it. You know, throughout this whole exercise of respectonomics, we've talked about the restoring of human dignity. And I think shelter is very, very much part of that. And
mhm.
that we need, as I say, to buy into it. So that's the personal shelter issue. Now, before I go to the corporate, do you have any thoughts on personal shelter in your own life or objectively in other people's lives?
No, like you say, I think shelter can mean different things for different people. And I think each individual would consider what that safety or the protection of shelter would be or meaning. So whether it's physical
Yeah.
location, which is what we are speaking about,
Right. Yeah.
right? And I think what I thought was interesting was the beginning where there's a difference between house and home.
Mm-hmm.
Houselessness and homelessness, which is
Yeah.
a completely other topic which we
Right.
could we could expand on, and we've chatted about briefly
Mhm.
previously.
Right.
So I think shelter is very important, and again, it can be defined very differently by different people in
Right.
terms of what is enough shelter, right?
Yes. Very good point.
Yeah,
I mean, we've beaten up on that point once before when we talked about how I knew we'd get Latin in here somewhere.
I knew
I
we
knew,
would.
I knew it. I knew it. But but interestingly, when Horace, the poet, the Latin poet, said, a Roman poet, said, "Sonavi apud meum," I had supper at my table.
Mm,
That's homeful.
right.
I don't know if there's such a word. Is there such a word as homeful?
I don't know,
Let's
but
make
you
it
just made it, and that's
a good
okay.
one. It's a good word, homeful.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful and homeful. But,
'Cause I think home, the sense of home is very different than house,
oh, absolutely.
right? Because you
Yeah,
can be without a house and feel like you have a home somewhere else, or
yeah.
it could be
Mhm.
with physical people
Within your
as well,
soul. Yeah,
or a relationship with other things, right? But interesting, but shelter, yes, from a protection standpoint,
yeah.
I view it as from elements.
Yeah, so we're talking about protecting from the elements, but we
Yeah.
are also letting ourselves into the idea that it's not just physical,
Mhm.
it's cerebral, it's psychological,
Right.
mental, and of course spiritual. And
Absolutely.
each one of us will determine the extent that they want to be sheltered and how they want to do it.
Right.
That's your point, I think, as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Individual. Now, let's move to the corporate, because the corporate one, I don't know about you, Sarah, but in all my 51 years at my desk, I don't think I ever heard a corporate manager, leader, executive ever say, "What are we doing to shelter our people?" I
Mm.
don't think I ever heard that question being asked, or any degree of commentary about it. In your HR world, I know that the shelter that a corporation will typically think of is the idea that it's a safe place to work.
Right.
And I absolutely agree with that. I mean, it can be rickety stairs, not a good idea. It can be doors that aren't hinged properly, through to people who are abusive or
Mhm.
mean-spirited or, discriminatory or any of those nasties. But yes, we need that kind of shelter in the corporate world. And I think that, at least bureaucratically, administratively, a lot of that work has already been done as in place.
Mhm.
There's a tremendous amount more to do, mind you.
Right.
I heard recently, and perhaps you could comment on this one point. I thought that the whole issue of women being given all of the same privileges or benefits as a man, I
Mhm.
thought that had moved along significantly. I've been told recently that actually it is now starting to go back in reverse. And I
Mm.
don't know if that's true or not. And it's anecdotal, but a
Right.
lot of what we talk about is anecdotal. Do you know something about respectonomics? It doesn't necessarily have that sort of articulate forensic background, but it does respond to, gosh, that's how I feel.
Mhm.
So what I'm expressing is what somebody said to me was a feeling of the backwardness where a woman is not getting the same advancement or
Mm.
opportunities. And I consider that to be a shelter issue.
Right, right.
Do you have any HR style comment?
I don't have any statistics
No.
on it. I would say that, based on, um, conversations or dialogues, that there is still a gap, if you will. in the corporate world in regards to that.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation alone could, again, also lead to an entirely different conversation around
Mhm.
that.
Right.
Um, eh, so I would say that I do believe that that gaps still exist. So now whether that's prevalent in every business or every line of business or every size of business, I'm sure that it's not. But like you say, it's anecdotal. So if people are talking about it, so even we have to remember as well, there's, like you say, forensic information, and then there's also perspective or point of view.
Right. Exactly. And that's
Right,
what.
so where a company may feel that they've implemented or imparted procedures or policies or guidelines or,
Yeah.
um, practices that would support, that the evenness across the board,
Right.
the perception may be different,
Right.
right? So that's, again,
It's
I think
and
a
I
whole
think
other
rather
topic.
like your when you think of your own personal shelter, of what
Mhm,
matters to you and how you're sheltered, the same applies to the corporation.
mhm,
It's still, though, a question that needs to be asked. Is the corporation, are the managers, is management, is it actually sheltering the employees beyond what you might call the the minimum standards of, a safe working
right,
place? Now, moving that along, we also come to the idea then again in the corporate world, how do we shelter the mind of the employees of the staff? And I think that's one of the most critical areas. I think the physicality is probably fairly well established. The mind part of it, the cerebral part of a corporation, that needs to be sheltered. It's a culture. And I think that's the
right,
word I want to almost focus on, is that culture and shelter are almost one and the same when it comes to looking after your employees. There needs to be a sheltering of the mind, a sheltering of that freedom of spirit, a sheltering of the character. And I don't mean, again, I'm not going to go on more about the business of discrimination and those nasties. I'm talking about that the corporation needs to be in a place that shelters the human being.
mm,
And the reason this is important, and it's so humanistic, if you shelter something, I'll give you an example. You have a bicycle, I believe. I have a bicycle, and it's kept undercover. Yes?
yes,
Yeah. Well, the reason you keep it undercover, and you might even put some 3-in-1 oil on it time to time and do a few other things. When you do all that, there's a reason. It's because when you need it, it will work. And you
right,
take it out and you're ready to pedal, and it works. Well, that's the same with us. The reason people think, oh, well, if we shelter people, we're going to be, overly careful or overly spoiling or something like that. No, what you're doing is an act of preservation so that when those resources are needed, I mean, gosh, we talk about the word of human resource. When those resources are needed, excuse me, when those resources are needed, they will be ready to go. But they won't be ready to go if they haven't been sheltered properly.
right,
You've heard me say that I think human resources is the wrong expression. I think
mm,
it's misleading, and it should be human treasure. As
mhm,
a matter of fact, I think you know this, we now own the domain humantreasure.ca. But the point of the matter is, the treasure that we're talking about, this human being, needs to be sheltered. And if you think it's worth sheltering a beautiful piece of jewelry or a beautiful piece of art, how much more is it worth sheltering the human being?
mhm,
And if that human being is part of your business, that is the responsibility of the business. And I think it's something that, you know, how you say, well, it's anecdotal, we'll talk about it, we'll get perspective, we'll think about it, we'll reflect on it. And I'm saying precisely that. I think that at the management level, the directorship level, this should be a question of how are we sheltering our people?
mhm,
How? Are we doing it effectively? Are there nicer ways of doing it, more effective ways? Sheltering doesn't mean that you're going to, what I call, take away people's immediacy, taking away what's really going on. You're not sheltering them in that sort of horrible sense of wrapping them in cotton wool. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. corporate politics today is so attuned to wrapping everybody in cotton wool. That
Mhm.
is the wrong approach. By all means, shelter me so I can go out and do my job. And the corporation needs to be, the business needs to be focused on sheltering people so that that internal treasure, that internal innovation, the productivity, the ideas, the newness, the freshness, the energy, if you want those to come out, shelter your people. Now, there is one side to sheltering that we've done it as parents, and that is there are some things that are nasty in the world, and you specifically and intentionally, you will protect people from those nasties. You will do that. And you might, at one level, it looks like you're concealing. You know that thing when you got the child says to the parent, "Why didn't you tell me?" And you
Mhm.
say, "Well, because I thought it was going to distract or hurt you."
Right.
Your intention is entirely honorable. So, what we're talking about here is there may be a time to shelter by withholding some information. That's fine. But I think, again, it's like so many of these things in our hearts, in our beings, we know what we mean. We know what's the right kind of shelter. And the shelter that's available for the chair of the board should be the same shelter that's available for the person who's what I call polishing the doorknobs. That it should be, we use the word democratic very easily.
Right.
Yes, shelter is democratic. And let me ask you one more thing, Sarah. If you're not sheltering your, I say troops, if you're not sheltering your people appropriately, if you're not, what level of assurance can you have that that same business is sheltering the customers properly, or the shareholders, or the suppliers? It's very, I keep coming back to the word of, well, it probably shouldn't be democratic, it should be homogenous. It
Mm.
applies in all phases of our operations. It applies in our own human life, and it should therefore apply in the corporate life. And I will sort of close off a bit here by saying the word corporation is from the Latin corpus, meaning a body. So if it applies to the human body, it must legally, shall we say, that's a bit of a big word, but it should be, at very least morally, apply to all phases of the corporate entity. I
Right.
think that's a fair assumption, not an assumption. I think that's a fair piece of logic. And I would like to see the board of directors, and I would like to see mission statements and all those places where people ask questions and do surveys is, are we sheltering you properly?
Mhm.
I've never seen the question before. Have you? Have you ever seen it?
Not phrased like that, no.
No. But I think it's a real question
Yes. Yeah.
and it needs a real answer. So I think I rest my case, but I wondered if you would like to do two things. One is I'd like you to close out the case today, particularly with your HR, but I'd also like you please to comment on the necessity of bringing Respectonomics into presentations and workshops, bringing them right to the corporate floor, in other words.
Yes, absolutely. I think businesses, need to look at it as foundational work, right? These are things that should be core values of whether no irregardless of the size of the business, whether you're a small business, you're a community group, or you're a larger
Mhm.
corporation. The concepts that are prevalent with respectonomics should be considered as core values or as foundational. And these are opportunities for businesses to really narrow down and focus on what is important and what will be prevalent in terms of developing employees, developing leadership within the organizations. No, again, no matter what their size is, and it can only lead to what you're putting in or pouring into your employees and how you're supporting them is what you're going to get back, what you're going to receive. And in addition to that, that's what your clients or your guests or your customers are going to receive. So really, these should be core foundational concepts. And Respectonomics is here to help identify maybe some blind spots that there are within
Mm.
organizations and to help you fill the gaps and create that foundation that's only going to help you level up And like you say, it's homogenous. When you've got employees that feel engaged and feel valued, and you have leaders that also feel engaged and feel valued, you're going to have clients, and your returns are going to be that they feel valued as well. So it's all cyclical. And on that note, we rest our case.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Jeremy.